The prisoner's accent was perfect. Too perfect, said Captain Sarah Reynolds. Captain Reynolds had interrogated 17 foreign operatives in her 6 years as an officer of military intelligence. Not one of them had spoken English so perfectly as the Russian prisoner, whose Russian accent was strong, but whose English rhythms were so distinctly American that only an ear attuned to the music of English could detect the "so." Before we get started with this story, please hit that subscribe button and activate the alerts or the notifications. The date was the 23rd of March, 2023. The location was Fort Meade, Maryland. This was your typical interrogation room: concrete walls, metal table, 2 chairs, and a mirrored wall. Captain Reynolds had held countless debriefings in rooms similar to this one. This was, or at least was supposed to be, a routine debriefing. They had a captured foreign intelligence agent. That was it. Get the information, record it, and then go on to the next case. However, something didn't feel right. The man across from her, identified in the file as Viktor Petrov, age 58, sat with perfect military posture. Not the rigid formality of someone trying too hard. The natural, ingrained discipline of someone who'd spent decades in uniform. His hands rested calmly on the table. No nervous tapping, no fidgeting. Just the quiet confidence of a professional soldier waiting for the game to begin. Reynolds had learned to read people. It was more than training. It was instinct honed over 6 years in military intelligence, refined through countless hours sitting across from operatives, double agents, contractors with secrets, soldiers with stories they couldn't tell. She'd learned that everyone had a tell, a micro-expression, a gesture, a pattern in their breathing when they lied, a slight hesitation before a prepared answer, a shift in eye contact when truth became uncomfortable. But this man, Petrov, the file said, he wasn't exhibiting any of the standard markers. He wasn't nervous, wasn't defensive, wasn't calculating his responses with the careful precision of someone maintaining a cover story. He was just waiting, like someone who'd spent so long in waiting rooms, debriefing rooms, interrogation rooms that the environment had become a second home. She watched him for 30 seconds before speaking. Silent observation. Sometimes the most revealing moments happened when people thought they weren't being evaluated. Some prisoners fidgeted, some affected boredom, some tried to establish dominance through eye contact. Petrov did none of these. He simply sat, present, patient, almost meditative in his stillness. Reynolds opened the file. Born in Moscow, 1965. Military service in Soviet GRU. Transitioned to FSB after the collapse. Specialized in NATO intelligence gathering. Captured 3 weeks ago attempting to access classified files at a defense contractor outside Washington. Clean. Almost too clean. She'd seen files like this before. Biographical information that checked all the boxes but felt assembled rather than lived. Names, dates, places, all verifiable, all documented, all perfectly consistent. Which was exactly the problem. Real lives were messy. They had gaps, inconsistencies, unexplained periods, jobs that didn't quite make sense, moves that seemed random. But intelligence cover stories? They were too perfect. Every detail accounted for, every timeline aligned, every piece of information supporting every other piece. This file felt like that, too coherent, too complete, like someone had built a life from scratch and made sure every element interlocked with precision engineering. Reynolds made a note in the margin. Biography feels constructed. She'd been trained by the best. Her mentor, retired Colonel Sarah Chen, had spent 30 years in military intelligence, 22 interrogations, 18 successful extractions of critical information. Chen had taught Reynolds that interrogation wasn't about breaking people. It was about understanding them, finding the story beneath the story, the truth hiding behind the performance. Everyone's playing a role, Chen used to say. Your job is to figure out which role, why they're playing it, and what they're trying to hide. Sometimes the biggest secrets aren't what they won't tell you, it's what they can't help telling you. Mr. Petrov, she began, keeping her voice neutral. Professional. I'm Captain Reynolds, Defense Intelligence Agency. I'll be conducting this debriefing. He looked at her. Really looked. Not the way prisoners usually did, sizing up their interrogator, looking for weaknesses, calculating angles. This was different. There was recognition in his eyes, not of her specifically, but of what she represented. The uniform, the rank, the institution. Captain, he said. The Russian accent was there, but underneath, she heard it again. That American rhythm. The way certain consonants landed, the slight upward inflection on the last word. I understand the process. She'd been trained to notice details, body language, micro-expressions, linguistic tells, the science of reading people who were trained not to be read. And right now, every instinct she'd honed over 6 years was screaming that this man was performing. Let's start with the basics, Reynolds said, pulling out her notepad. Old school. No computers in interrogation rooms. Security protocol. You were apprehended at Lockheed Martin's facility in Arlington. What were you after? I think you know what I was after, Captain. I want to hear it from you. He smiled, slight, controlled. Satellite communication protocols, encryption keys for the new reconnaissance network. Truth. The file confirmed he'd been caught downloading exactly that data, but there was something in how he said it. No defensiveness, no anger at being caught, just stating facts. Why? She pressed. Because that's what I was sent to do. Sent by whom? You read the file. GRU, FSB, take your pick. Reynolds leaned back, studied him. The file said 58. His face showed it, weathered, lined, the kind of aging that came from stress and too many years in the field. But his eyes, they were sharp, alert, young, somehow, like they'd seen things that his official biography couldn't contain. You've been in the United States for how long? She asked. This particular assignment? 18 months? Before that? I moved around, European stations mostly, Berlin, London, Prague. She made a note, then looked up. Your English is excellent. Thank you. Most Russian operatives have an accent that fades with time. Yours seems to come and go. Sometimes it's strong. Sometimes it almost disappears. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Brief. Gone. In a second. But she caught it. Calculation. Decision-making. Like he was weighing how much truth to allow into the conversation. I've spent a lot of time in English-speaking countries, he said. Where did you learn? Pause. 3 seconds. In interrogation, 3 seconds was an eternity. Language school, Moscow, 1985. Reynolds wrote it down, then circled it. 1985. He would have been 20, young, impressionable. The year Gorbachev came to power, the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union, though nobody knew it yet. Tell me about your family, she said, switching tactics. Personal details often revealed more than professional ones. No family. None? Parents dead, no siblings, never married. Standard cover story for deep cover operatives. No attachments, no vulnerabilities, no one back home to leverage. She'd seen it before. But again, the way he said it, there was something hollow in his voice. Not the practiced detachment of a professional, something deeper, sadder. That must be lonely, she said, softening her tone. Building rapport. Classic technique. He looked at her again. This time, the recognition was clearer. He knew what she was doing, and more than that, he seemed almost grateful for it. Like someone who'd been waiting years for someone to ask that question honestly. Yes, he said quietly, it is. They sat in silence. The room's ventilation system hummed, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Outside, the sounds of Fort Meade, vehicles, voices, the rhythmic footsteps of soldiers moving through corridors, filtered through walls designed to keep secrets in and noise out. Reynolds checked her watch. She had 3 hours scheduled for this debrief. Standard procedure. But already, 15 minutes in, she knew this wasn't going to be standard. "What's your real name?" she asked suddenly. The question hit like a physical blow. She saw it, the way his shoulders tensed, the brief widening of his eyes, the sharp intake of breath, years of training screaming at him to maintain cover, decades of discipline holding the lie in place. "Viktor Petrov," he said, but his voice was different now, quieter, almost a whisper. "No," Reynolds said, leaning forward. "What's your real name?" The silence stretched. 10 seconds, 20, 30. She didn't break it, didn't fill it with more questions, just waited, patient, present, giving him space to make the choice. When he finally spoke, the Russian accent was gone. "Michael," he said. "Michael Harrison." The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had moved in. Reynolds' heart was pounding, but she kept her face neutral, professional. This was it, the moment every interrogator trained for, the break, the confession. But this felt different, bigger. "Michael Harrison," she repeated. "Born where?" "Columbus, Ohio, May 14th, 1965. She wrote it down, hands steady despite the adrenaline. "Parents?" "Frank and Margaret Harrison. Dad was a factory worker, Ford plant. Mom was a nurse. They're both gone now. Dad died in '98. Heart attack. Mom passed in 2006. Cancer." The details were too specific, too real. No one maintaining a cover story gave that much personal information. They kept it vague, generic, safe. But this was memory, raw, unfiltered, true. "How did you end up here?" Reynolds asked. "In that chair, with that name, that life." Harrison, she thought of him as Harrison now, not Petrov, looked down at his hands, weathered, scarred, the hands of a man who'd lived a hard life in hard places. "Do you know what it takes to go deep cover, Captain?" he asked. Not hostile, genuinely curious if she understood. "Training," she said. "Preparation. Psychological conditioning. That's part of it. But the real thing, the thing they don't tell you in intelligence school, is that you have to be willing to become someone else. Completely. Not just play a role. Become it. Live it. Breathe it. Until the person you were before doesn't exist anymore." He looked up. His eyes were wet. Not crying, but close. "I was 23 years old," he continued. "Fresh out of Army intelligence school, top of my class, spoke fluent Russian. My grandmother was from Moscow, came over after the war. Taught me the language from childhood. Used to tell me stories about the old country, about snow that fell for days, about churches with golden domes, about poets and musicians and a culture that was beautiful even when it was broken. I grew up speaking Russian as naturally as English, never thought it would be the skill that would define my entire life." Harrison paused. His hands moved from flat on the table to clasped together. A small shift, but Reynolds noted it. Tension, memory bringing physical discomfort. "The agency approached me in February of 1988. 2 men in suits showed up at my barracks at Fort Huachuca. Said they'd been watching my file. Said they needed someone young, smart, committed, someone who could go in deep, stay in deep, become the enemy so we could understand the enemy. They made it sound noble, patriotic. a chance to serve my country in a way most soldiers never could. They said it would be 2 years, maybe 3 at most, in and out. Cold War would end eventually, they said. We'd win. I'd come home, get promoted, get recognition, maybe even get my picture on a wall somewhere. He laughed, bitter, hard. 2 years, they said. I believed them. I was 23. I believed everything. Believed in duty, in honor, in the mission. Believed that my country would never forget me, never abandon me, never leave me out there alone. Reynolds felt a tightness in her chest. This was the moment, the crack in the facade, the place where truth lived. She stayed quiet. Let him continue. Let him tell the story he'd been carrying for decades. CIA, Reynolds said. Not a question. Defense Intelligence Agency, actually. Your predecessors, 1988, right before the wall came down. They thought the Cold War would last forever, needed assets in place for the long haul. Reynolds tried to process it. 1988, 35 years ago. This man had been undercover for 35 years. Deep cover. The kind of operation that appeared in textbooks as cautionary tales. Assets who went in and never came back. Operatives who got so deep they forgot which side they were on. What was your mission? She asked. Initially, simple. Get recruited by GRU, prove my loyalty, rise through ranks, report back intelligence on Soviet military operations, standard infiltration. And then the Soviet Union collapsed. And then the Soviet Union collapsed, he echoed. 91. I was in Moscow when it happened, watched tanks roll through Red Square. Saw the hammer and sickle come down from the Kremlin. Stood in a crowd of Russians, because by then I was Russian captain. I'd spent 3 years becoming Russian, and I watched history change. People were crying, some from joy, some from fear, some from confusion. They didn't know what came next. Neither did I. He shifted in his chair. The memories were vivid. Reynolds could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just recounting facts. He was there, living it again. I remember calling my handler that night, using the emergency protocol. Dead drop in Gorky Park. Left a message. Soviet Union dissolved. What are my orders? Standard procedure. Wait for extraction plan. I waited 3 days, 4 days, a week. Finally got the response. Maintain cover, monitor situation, new instructions forthcoming. Harrison's voice took on a hollow quality. New instructions forthcoming. That was August 1991. Do you know when I got those new instructions? Never. They never came. Because the agency didn't have instructions. Nobody knew what to do. The enemy we'd been fighting for 40 years was gone. But the intelligence apparatus was still there. KGB became SB, GRU reorganized. My cover held. My legend was solid. I'd spent 3 years proving myself, rising through ranks, establishing credibility. I was trusted, valuable. And suddenly, instead of being an asset in an enemy that no longer existed, I was an asset in a new enemy that nobody understood yet. He paused, looked directly at Reynolds. The Cold War ended, Captain, but my war kept going. Because once you're in deep, once you've become someone else, extracting you isn't simple. It's not like pulling a soldier off the front line. You can't just get on a plane and fly home. Your entire existence is a lie. Your identity is fabricated. Your documentation is forged. Your life is a performance. And if you break cover, if you try to leave, you don't just risk yourself. You risk every operation connected to you, every contact, every piece of intelligence you've gathered. The whole network collapses. Reynolds was writing quickly now. Every word mattered. Every detail was evidence, proof, validation. So they left you, she said. They left me. New mission brief came in '93. Track organized crime connections to former Soviet military, report on weapons trafficking, monitor nuclear material security. Legitimate concerns, real threats, important intelligence, the kind of work that saved lives, American lives, Allied lives. How could I say no? How could I abandon my post when the mission was real and necessary and critical? You couldn't. I couldn't. So I stayed. 1 year became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 10. Each year they'd tell me, just 1 more year, just until this operation concludes, just until we establish new assets, just until the political situation stabilizes. Always 1 more year, always 1 more mission, always 1 more reason why coming home had to wait. Reynolds felt sick. She'd heard stories, legends really. Operatives who'd gone dark, lost contact, presumed dead or defected. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated, cold. Did you have a handler? She asked. 4 of them, over the years. First one, Tom Bradley. He was good. Old school CIA, understood deep cover. Made contact every 3 months like clockwork. Dead drops in Prague, Berlin, sometimes Vienna. He'd leave messages, encouragement, updates. Good work, information valuable. Hang in there. Small things, but they mattered. They reminded me someone knew I existed. Someone was reading my reports. Someone cared. Harrison's voice softened with memory. Bradley retired in '95. They threw him a party at Langley. I heard about it through back channels. He'd spent 30 years in the field. Earned his rest. I was happy for him. Really. But also, he paused, also terrified. Because Bradley knew me, knew my real name, knew my story, knew how to reach me. When he left, I lost my lifeline. What about the second handler? Jennifer Martinez, young, ambitious, early 30s. She was professional, efficient, but she didn't understand deep cover. Not really. She'd done field work but never long-term infiltration. Never had to live a lie for years on end. She treated me like an asset, a source, a number in a file, made contact every 6 months, then every 9 months, then yearly. By '98, I was lucky to hear from her once. That November, she was killed. Car accident in Berlin. Single vehicle crash. Official report said she fell asleep at the wheel. Maybe that's true. Maybe it wasn't. I'll never know. Reynolds wrote, handler deaths, verify. Third handler was David Park. He lasted 5 years, 2003 through 2008. Park was different. He actually visited once. 2005. Met me in a cafe in St. Petersburg, sat across from me, looked me in the eye, said, "Thank you for your service." First time anyone had said that to me in 17 years. I almost broke down right there. Almost blew my cover just from hearing those words. Harrison's hands were shaking now. Subtle, but Reynolds saw it. Park got promoted, moved to counterterrorism. September 11th changed everything. Intelligence priorities shifted, resources redirected. I understood. Terrorism was the new threat. Russia was yesterday's enemy. I didn't matter anymore. Not strategically, not politically. I was just a legacy asset, an old file, an operation from a different era. And the fourth handler? Never met him. Never even knew his real name. Contact was entirely digital by then. Encrypted messages every year or two. Brief, impersonal. Continue monitoring. Report if significant developments. Maintain cover. That was it. That was my contact with my country, with my identity, with who I used to be. A few sentences every couple years from someone who didn't know my real name and didn't care to learn it. He looked up, met Reynolds' eyes. The last message I got was 2009, March 17th. I remember the date because it was St. Patrick's Day. Americans in Moscow were celebrating, drinking, being loud, being American. And I couldn't join them, couldn't be American, could only watch from the outside and pretend I didn't understand what they were saying. That message said, budget constraints, operation review, maintain cover pending further evaluation. Translation, you're not a priority, we'll get back to you. Maybe. 2009, that was 14 years ago. Yes, Captain, that was 14 years ago. 14 years of silence, 14 years of wondering if anyone remembered I existed, 14 years of watching my parents die from a distance, of missing their funerals, of having no one to grieve with, of being so deeply buried in a lie that the truth became a memory I couldn't quite trust anymore. The room felt cold now. Reynolds pulled her jacket tighter, even though the temperature hadn't changed. This man across from her, this forgotten soldier, had been abandoned, left in place, no extraction, no recognition, just endless mission creep justified by some bureaucrat's memo about budget priorities and strategic value. Why didn't you just come in? She asked. Walk into an embassy, identify yourself, demand extraction. Harrison laughed, bitter, hard. And say what? Hi, I'm Michael Harrison, deep-covered DIA asset. Please verify my identity and bring me home. Captain, by 2010, my original handler was retired, living in Florida, probably forgot I existed. The case officer who knew my real identity was dead. The operation codename, Nightingale, was buried in archives that got digitized and corrupted. My authentication codes were 15 years out of date. As far as any official record showed, Viktor Petrov was a real person with a real history, and I was him. But you had documentation, original identification, proof of who you were. Had. Past tense. When you go deep cover, Captain, you don't carry your American passport with you. You don't keep your driver's license tucked in your wallet. You don't maintain connections to your old identity. Everything gets locked away, stored, supposedly secure, but storage facilities close. Archives get consolidated. Computer systems change. Data gets migrated and sometimes corrupted. By 2015, I tried to access verification through 5 different channels. All dead ends. Reynolds leaned forward. Walk me through it. Every attempt you made to make contact, every time you tried to come home. Harrison closed his eyes, memory clearly painful, then began speaking. First attempt, 2011, right after Irina died. I was emotionally destroyed. Grief does that, strips away the pretense, makes you desperate for something real. I went to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, walked right up to the security checkpoint, asked to speak with the defense attaché, told them I had information about Russian intelligence operations, standard approach, used old code phrases, verification protocols from my training. The Marine Guard looked at me like I was crazy, said the code phrases were outdated, obsolete, told me if I had information to submit, I could go through official channels, fill out forms, provide documentation. I tried to explain, tried to tell them I was American, but they thought I was FSB, trying to infiltrate, testing security. They escorted me off property. He opened his eyes, the pain visible. Second attempt, 2013. Different approach. I went to Berlin, found a CIA station chief. I won't say his name, he's probably still in service. Met him at a cafe, laid it out, told him my real name, my operational history, the names of my handlers, everything I could remember. He listened politely, took notes, said he'd pass it along, asked me to check back in 2 weeks. I did. He wasn't there. Left a message with a new officer. Never heard back. 6 months later, I got a visit from FSB Internal Security. Someone had reported me as suspicious. They questioned me for 4 hours. My cover held barely, but I realized someone at CIA had reported me as a potential Russian operative trying to compromise American intelligence. My attempt to come home had marked me as an enemy agent. Reynolds was writing furiously. Every detail mattered. Third attempt? 2017. Prague. This time I didn't try official channels. Too risky. Instead, I tried to contact retired officers. Found a name, a former DIA officer who'd worked in Eastern Europe in the 90s. I tracked him down, sent him a letter, explained who I was, used operational details only someone on the inside would know. Dates, locations, code names, begged him to verify my story, to reach back through channels, to find someone who remembered Operation Nightingale. What happened? He contacted me, met me in person, said he remembered Nightingale, said it was terminated in '93, said assets were extracted or burned, said if I was really Michael Harrison, I'd either be home or dead. Told me I was probably suffering from false memories, maybe brain damage. Maybe I'd been compromised by FSB and didn't know it. Maybe I should seek psychiatric help. The room was silent. Even the ventilation seemed quieter. He didn't believe you, Reynolds said softly. Worse. He felt sorry for me. Treated me like a broken man with delusions, gave me contact information for mental health services, told me paranoia was common in intelligence work. Told me to let it go, to accept my life, to stop chasing ghosts. Harrison's voice dropped to almost a whisper. That was the worst part, Captain. Not being rejected, not being suspected, but being pitied. Being treated like someone whose mind had broken, like Michael Harrison was a fantasy I'd created to escape the reality of being Viktor Petrov. Like I'd been Russian so long I'd invented an American past to cope with the loneliness. Reynolds felt tears pressing behind her eyes, professional detachment slipping. This wasn't an interrogation anymore. This was confession, bearing witness to a sacrifice so deep, so complete, that the person making it had been erased from existence. So, you stayed, she said softly. I stayed, and I did my job. For 35 years, I gathered intelligence. I reported what I could. I saved American lives. You'll never know how many because the operations are still classified, but I saved them. And I became Viktor Petrov so completely that sometimes I'd wake up and forget Michael Harrison had ever existed. Why get caught now? Reynolds asked. Why access that facility? You had to know it was high risk, had to know you'd be apprehended. Harrison looked at her, really looked, and she saw it. The exhaustion, the weight of 35 years of lies, the burden of being two people, or no one, for longer than most people's entire careers. Because I'm 58 years old, Captain. I'm tired, I'm alone, and I wanted to go home. Getting arrested is your extraction plan? It's the only plan I have left. I couldn't just show up at an embassy, couldn't make contact through normal channels. But getting arrested? By military intelligence? For espionage? That goes through official channels, gets reviewed, verified. Eventually, maybe, someone will look deep enough. Check old records, notice discrepancies. Wonder why a Russian operative has an American's dental records from 1987. Why his fingerprints match a DIA case officer from 1988. The genius of it hit Reynolds like cold water. He'd gotten himself caught on purpose, created a situation where someone had to investigate deeply, had to verify his identity against every possible database, had to check and double-check because the charges were so serious. You've been trying to come home, she said. For 15 years, Harrison confirmed. This is my 4th attempt. First 3 times I got close to facilities, got spooked, Backed off. Couldn't go through with it. Too many years maintaining cover. Too much fear that I'd blown it and I was actually wanted. That coming in would mean prison instead of recognition. What changed? I turned 58 last May. My father died at 59. Heart attack. I realized I'm running out of time. If I'm going to die, I want to die as Michael Harrison. I want someone, anyone, to know who I really was, what I really did. I don't need medals or recognition or anything official. I just need someone to know that I existed, that I served, that I never stopped being an American soldier even when I had to forget I was one. Reynolds stood up. Her legs felt shaky. She walked to the one-way mirror. Knew Colonel Parker was on the other side, listening, recording, processing what they were hearing. She needed a minute, needed to think. Behind her, Harrison spoke quietly. I know this is difficult, Captain. I know you have no reason to believe me. I'm a prisoner with a wild story. Could be an elaborate cover, a mind game, Russian psychological operation. I've been trained in every deception technique there is. You'd be right to be skeptical. She turned back. I don't think you're lying. Why not? Because no one would create this story as a cover. It's too painful, too real. Covers are designed to be clean, verifiable, confident. You're none of those things. You're exhausted, you're grieving, you're honest. He smiled, sad, grateful. Thank you. Reynolds sat back down, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Okay, we're going to do this properly. I'm going to document everything, every detail you can remember, every operation, every handler, every contact, every piece of information that can be verified. And then I'm going to take this up my chain of command and I'm going to make them listen. They won't believe you, Harrison said. I'm a ghost, a footnote in an old file that nobody remembers. Maybe, but I'm going to try anyway. For the next 4 hours they talked. Reynolds filled 17 pages of notes, names, dates, operations, dead drops, code words, verification protocols. Harrison's memory was sharp, detailed, exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 35 years living as an intelligence operative. They took a break around 1400 hours. Reynolds stepped out of the interrogation room. Colonel Parker was waiting in the observation room, 52 years old, 28 years in intelligence, currently the senior officer overseeing foreign operative interrogations at Fort Meade. What do you think, Captain? Parker asked. I think he's telling the truth, sir. That's insane. I know, sir, but I also know what lying looks like, what deception sounds like. This man isn't deceiving anyone. He's confessing. Parker rubbed his face. Tired. This was the last thing he needed, a routine interrogation turning into a bureaucratic nightmare that could implicate multiple agencies and span decades of intelligence operations. Assuming he is who he says he is, Parker said slowly. What's our next move? We need to verify. Pull old DIA records from 1988. Check for any operation involving deep cover infiltration of Soviet GRU. Look for a Michael Harrison in the system. Compare his fingerprints and dental records to military databases. That could take weeks. Then we have weeks, sir. We're not releasing him. He's not going anywhere. And frankly, if he's Russian FSB, keeping him here is protocol anyway. If he's American, keeping him here protects him. Protects him from what? From whoever left him out there for 35 years. If he's telling the truth, there are people who know he exists. People who made the decision not to extract him. People who might not want him coming home and talking about how he was abandoned. Parker was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Continue the interrogation. Get everything. I'll start making calls. Quietly. Very quietly. Reynolds went back in. Harrison was exactly where she'd left him, sitting, calm, patient, the discipline of a soldier who'd learned to wait. They believe you? He asked. We're investigating. That's all I can say. Fair enough. They continued. More names, more operations. Harrison talked about a network he'd helped dismantle in the late 90s, human trafficking ring operating out of Vladivostok. American assets had broken it up based on intelligence he'd provided. 300 women and children rescued. He talked about nuclear material theft he'd reported in 2004, FSB sting operation he'd been part of. Weapons-grade plutonium recovered before it reached black market buyers. He talked about the small things, too. The details that made the story real. Learning to love Russian literature because that's what Viktor Petrov would do. Celebrating Orthodox Christmas, missing Thanksgiving. Forgetting what American coffee tasted like. Losing his Midwestern accent. Dreaming in Russian. "Did you ever have anyone?" Reynolds asked. "Over there. A relationship. Someone who mattered." Harrison was quiet. The longest pause yet. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more vulnerable. "Yes, once. Her name was Irina Volkov, schoolteacher in Moscow, literature and poetry. We met at a cafe in 2007. I was reading Pushkin, had to maintain cultural credibility for my cover, and she sat down at the next table. Started talking about the passage I was on, about sacrifice and love and whether honor could exist in a corrupt world. We talked for 3 hours. He smiled. The first genuine smile Reynolds had seen from him. Sad, but real. She was 42, never married, devoted her life to teaching, to her students, to making sure they understood that literature wasn't about memorizing lines. It was about understanding what it meant to be human. She had this way of seeing people, really seeing them, not their appearance or their status or their cover story. She saw something in me, something I'd almost forgotten was there. Did she know who you really were? No. God, no. She knew Viktor Petrov, a mid-level FSB analyst, quiet, bookish, a little sad. She used to say I had the eyes of someone who'd lost something important and was still looking for it. She was right, of course, but she thought I was grieving a lost love, a failed marriage, something explainable, something Russian. She never knew she was falling in love with a ghost. Harrison's hands were shaking again, more visible now. We dated for 3 years, slow, careful, the way people in their 40s date. No rush, no drama, just dinners. Walks in Gorky Park, theater on Friday nights. Her apartment had bookshelves that covered every wall, floor to ceiling, poetry, history, philosophy, Russian classics and translations of American authors. We'd sit and read together, sometimes for hours, not even talking, just existing in the same space. It was the most peaceful I'd felt in 20 years. You loved her. I loved her. Both versions of me loved her. Michael Harrison loved her for seeing past the performance. Viktor Petrov loved her for accepting him exactly as he appeared. The truth is, Captain, after that long Undercover, I didn't know which version was real anymore. Maybe I was both. Maybe I was neither. Maybe love was the only thing that felt true. Reynolds felt tears pressing behind her eyes. This wasn't just a mission report anymore. This was confession, witness, someone finally listening to a story that had been locked away for years. What happened to her? Cancer. Ovarian, diagnosed in January 2010, stage 4, the kind where doctors give you months, not years. She was 45 years old, strong, healthy, vibrant, and suddenly she was dying. His voice broke. He stopped, took a breath, continued. I took care of her, every day. Her family was gone, parents dead, no siblings. Her friends visited, but I was there. Morning, afternoon, night. I fed her when she was too weak to feed herself, read to her when she was too tired to hold a book, held her hand when the pain was too much and morphine was the only mercy left. The nurses at the hospital knew me, called me her devoted husband even though we'd never married. Maybe we should have. Maybe I should have given her that. But marriage would have required documentation, verification, official records that might have exposed my cover, So I loved her without the paperwork, without the ceremony, without the official acknowledgement that would have made it real. I'm so sorry. She died on March 8th, 2011, International Women's Day. She'd always loved that holiday. Used to say it reminded her that women were the foundation of civilization, the teachers, the mothers, the keepers of culture. She died holding my hand, told me she loved me, told me to find happiness, to not spend my life grieving, to live. Harrison looked directly at Reynolds, and I said I loved her too, in Russian, as Viktor Petrov, because that's who she knew, who she loved. Michael Harrison was buried so deep that even in that moment, the most honest moment of my life, I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't give her that one real thing, my real name, my real self. I let her die believing a lie, loving a ghost. The silence in the room was heavy, complete, like the weight of 35 years of secrets had settled into the space between them. By 1700 hours, they'd covered everything, every operation, every contact, every moment of 35 years living as someone else. Reynolds' hand was cramping from writing. Her head ached from concentrating, but she had it all, a complete record of Michael Harrison's life as Viktor Petrov. What happens now? Harrison asked. Now we wait. They're checking everything. If you're telling the truth, and I believe you are, they'll find proof. And then, she paused, didn't want to promise something she couldn't deliver. And then we'll see. And if they don't find proof, if the records are gone or corrupted or deliberately erased, then we keep digging. And if all else fails, I'll testify. I'll tell them what you told me. I'll fight for you. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. Because if you're telling the truth, you're a soldier. An American soldier who served his country for 35 years without recognition, without support, without even the basic human dignity of being acknowledged. And soldiers don't abandon each other. Harrison's eyes filled with tears. This time, they fell, silent, steady. The tears of a man who'd waited 3 decades to hear someone say he mattered. Thank you, Captain. You're welcome, Sergeant. She'd checked his story. Michael Harrison had entered service as a private. By the time he went undercover, he'd been promoted to sergeant, 3 stripes, E5, respectable rank for a 23-year-old, the rank he'd held when he stopped being Michael Harrison and became Viktor Petrov. The investigation took 6 days. Colonel Parker pulled every string he had, called in favors, accessed archives that hadn't been opened in decades, tracked down people who'd worked in military intelligence in the 80s and 90s, people who were retired now, scattered across the country, living quiet lives after years in the shadows. Day 1. Parker started with personnel records, Defense Intelligence Agency employment from 1987 through 1990. The records were incomplete, some files corrupted during system migrations in the early 2000s. But he found fragments, a payroll entry for Sergeant Michael Harrison, assignment, Special Operations Division, clearance level, top secret SCI, status as of December 1988, field assignment, extended duration. Day 2, fingerprint analysis. They pulled Harrison's prints from when he was processed after arrest, cross-referenced against every database available, military records, FBI, Interpol, and there, in an archive that predated digital storage, preserved on physical cards in a warehouse in West Virginia, they found a match. Fingerprint card dated October 1987. Name, Harrison Michael J. Rank, Sergeant E5. Social Security number matched birth records from Columbus, Ohio. Match probability 100%. Day 3, dental records. They brought in a forensic dentist from the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System. Compared X-rays taken from Petrov during medical screening against archived dental records from Fort Huachuca, 1987. Distinctive pattern of fillings, one wisdom tooth removed, a small chip on the left incisor from a childhood accident. Every detail matched. The dentist's report was unequivocal. Same person, no question. Day 4. Parker tracked down someone who'd actually known Harrison, retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert Chen, now 73 years old, living in Sarasota, Florida. Spent 32 years in military intelligence. Parker flew down personally, showed Chen photos of Viktor Petrov, asked if he recognized the face. Chen studied the photos for a long time, then said, "That's Mike Harrison. Older, weathered, but that's him. I was his training officer at Huachuca in '87. Brilliant kid. Best Russian speaker I ever heard from a native English speaker. We recruited him for something special. I can't tell you what, even now, even retired, some things stay classified. But I can tell you he was one of the good ones, smart, dedicated, brave. I signed his deployment orders in December '88, never saw him again, assumed he'd moved on, different assignments. You know how it is in intelligence, people disappear into their work." Parker asked, "Did you ever wonder what happened to him?" Chen was quiet. Then, "I tried to find out once, mid-90s. I was working on a project, thought Harrison's language skills might be useful. Pulled his file. Status said, separated from service, 1990. I figured he'd gotten out, gone private sector. A lot of good people left after the wall fell. Budget cuts, downsizing. I didn't think anything was wrong. I should have. God, I should have dug deeper." Day 5. Operation Records. Parker accessed classified archives. Level above his clearance, he had to get special authorization from the Defense Secretary himself. Found Project Nightingale. Deep cover infiltration operation. Launched October 1988. Primary asset, Sergeant Michael J. Harrison. Mission, infiltrate Soviet GRU. Provide intelligence on military operations, weapons development, strategic planning. Duration, 24 to 36 months. Extraction planned, 1991. The file included situation reports, intelligence Harrison had sent back, valuable information, troop movements, weapons tests, political assessments. Reports came regularly through 1990, then less frequently through 95, sporadic through 2000. Last verified report, March 2009. And then, buried at the bottom of the file, Parker found the termination memo. Dated April 15, 2009. Subject, Project Nightingale. Asset status review. Conclusion. Asset Nightingale assessed as low priority in current strategic environment. Funding allocation discontinued pending future operational requirements. No extraction authorized at this time. Asset will maintain cover and report as able. Handler contact reduced to annual verification. Parker read that memo 3 times. Tried to find some nuance, some hidden meaning that would make it less damning. But the language was clear. Cold. Bureaucratic. Michael Harrison had been deemed not worth the cost of bringing home. Day 6. Verification complete. Parker assembled everything. Built a case file that was undeniable. Fingerprints, dental records, witness testimony, operation records, paper trail spanning 35 years. He took it to General Morrison, director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Laid it all out. Morrison read through everything. Took 2 hours. Didn't say a word until he'd reviewed every page. Then he looked up at Parker. "This is real," Morrison said. Not a question. "Yes, sir. Every word Harrison told Captain Reynolds, every detail. It's all verified. He's been out there for 35 years, and we left him there." Morrison closed the file, rubbed his face with both hands, the weight of institutional failure visible in every movement. "Get him home," Morrison said, "properly, with honor. and find out everyone who was in the chain of command for that termination decision. I want names. I want accountability. We don't abandon our people, ever. This is a failure. It's on us, and we're going to fix it. Parker showed Reynolds the file. They were in his office, secure room, soundproofed, no windows. He was telling the truth, Parker said. Every word. Michael Harrison, Sergeant, Defense Intelligence Agency, deep cover operative, served for 35 years, and we left him there. What do we do now, sir? We bring him home, properly, with honor, with recognition. I've contacted the Defense Secretary's office. This goes all the way to the top. There's going to be an investigation into how this happened, how an American soldier got abandoned in the field for 3 decades. But first, we bring him home. They held a small ceremony. Nothing public. Security concerns. Harrison's cover was blown, but his knowledge was still classified. 35 years of intelligence work. Operational details, sources, methods, networks. All of it still sensitive. All of it still dangerous in the wrong hands. He couldn't just walk free. Couldn't do interviews. Couldn't tell his story to the world. But they could give him something. Acknowledgement, recognition. Witness. Fort Meade. Building 3. Conference room converted into a ceremonial space. Private, secure, soundproofed. No windows, no cameras, no recording devices. Just witnesses. Just truth. Present. Colonel Parker, Captain Reynolds. 3 senior officers from DIA who'd worked through the verification process. And General Morrison himself, the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, who'd flown in from Washington specifically for this moment. And Michael Harrison, wearing a uniform for the first time in 35 years. The uniform itself was significant. Army dress blues, tailored, fresh. The dark blue jacket with gold buttons, the lighter blue trousers with gold stripe down the leg, white shirt, black tie, black shoes polished to a mirror shine. And on his shoulders, the rank insignia that told the story of a career that had continued in shadow even when officially it didn't exist. Master Sergeant, 7 stripes, 3 up, 3 down, 1 diamond in the middle. They'd calculated it carefully, reviewed his service record from before he went under, projected what his career trajectory would have been if he'd stayed stateside, averaged time and grade for promotions, performance evaluations based on the intelligence he'd provided, citations that would have been earned if anyone had known to award them. They couldn't give him back the 35 years, couldn't undo the isolation, couldn't erase the abandonment. But they could give him the rank he'd earned through service, even when no one was counting. Harrison had stood in front of a mirror for 10 minutes before the ceremony, just looking at himself. Reynolds had seen him, had watched through a partially open door, seen him touch the rank insignia, run his fingers over the stripes. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from recognition, from remembering who he'd been, from seeing who he might have become. The ceremony started at 1400 hours. Everyone stood at attention. Morrison entered last. Everyone saluted. The formality of military ritual, the structure that gave meaning to chaos, the protocol that turned individual sacrifice into institutional acknowledgement. At ease, Morrison said. Everyone relaxed to parade rest, except Harrison. He stayed at attention. Perfect posture, eyes forward, the muscle memory of decades of discipline, the training that never left, even when everything else did. Sergeant Harrison, Morrison said. His voice was formal but not cold, respectful, heavy with awareness of what this moment meant. 35 years ago, you were asked to serve your country in a way few soldiers ever are. You were asked to give up your identity, your life, your connection to everything and everyone you knew. You were asked to become someone else, to live a lie so complete that even you might forget the truth. You were told it would last 2 years, maybe 3. You were told you'd come home. that you'd be recognized, that your service would be acknowledged. Morrison paused, the weight of institutional failure hanging in the air. We lied to you, not intentionally, not maliciously, but through bureaucratic indifference, through budget constraints, through shifting priorities and forgotten promises, through the casual cruelty of institutions that forget the human cost of the missions they order. You served for 35 years without recognition, without support, without even the basic dignity of knowing someone remembered you existed. That was wrong. It was a betrayal. And on behalf of the United States Army and the Defense Intelligence Agency, I apologize. Harrison's jaw tightened, emotion carefully controlled. Years of practice keeping feelings locked away. But Reynolds saw it. The slight tremor in his chin, the wetness in his eyes, the decades of grief and anger and loneliness finally acknowledged. For your service, Morrison continued, we have verified the following. You provided intelligence that prevented weapons proliferation. You identified human trafficking networks that led to rescue operations saving hundreds of lives. You reported on nuclear material security that enabled interdiction of black market sales. You tracked organized crime connections that aided law enforcement operations across 3 continents. Your work, your sacrifice, mattered. It saved lives, American lives, Allied lives, innocent lives. That work is classified. The details may never be public. But I want you to know, your service was not wasted. Your sacrifice was not meaningless. You made a difference. Morrison stepped forward. In his hand, a case, dark blue velvet. He opened it. Inside, a medal, bronze, hanging from a ribbon striped red, white, and blue. Defense Meritorious Service Medal. Not the highest decoration, not what Harrison deserved, honestly. That would require full disclosure, public acknowledgement, details that were still classified. This was what they could give within the constraints of security, within the limits of what could be officially documented without compromising ongoing operations. But it was official. It was real. It was documented proof that Michael Harrison had served, had mattered, had been seen. Morrison pinned it to Harrison's chest. The medal caught the fluorescent light, gleamed, real, permanent, undeniable. "Welcome home, Sergeant," Morrison said, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. "Your war is over." Harrison saluted, sharp, precise, perfect. The salute of a soldier who'd never stopped being a soldier even when he had to forget he was one. Morrison returned it. The mutual respect of one warrior to another. The acknowledgement that service came in many forms, that courage wasn't always loud, that sometimes the bravest thing was to endure, to persist, to keep faith even when abandoned. The other officers saluted. Parker, Reynolds, the 3 from DIA, all of them standing at attention, all of them honoring a sacrifice most of them couldn't fully comprehend. When Harrison finally lowered his hand, tears were streaming down his face. Not sobbing, not dramatic, just quiet tears. The kind that came from a reservoir filled over decades, from pressure finally released, from a burden not removed, but finally acknowledged as real, as heavy, as worthy of witness. "Thank you," he whispered, to Morrison, to all of them, to the institution that had failed him and was now, finally, trying to make it right. "Thank you for seeing me." After the ceremony, Reynolds found Harrison in a quiet corridor. He was still in uniform, still processing, 35 years of waiting, of hoping, of believing that maybe, someday, someone would remember he existed, And now someone had. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "They're setting me up with housing, pension, medical care, therapy, probably. I've got a lot to process. 35 years of trauma and isolation and identity confusion. That doesn't just go away. Will you be okay?" "I think so. Eventually. For the first time in decades, I can just be myself. No cover, no lies. Just Michael Harrison." "That's enough." They stood in comfortable silence. Then Harrison spoke again. "Can I ask you something, Captain?" "Of course. Why did you believe me when you had every reason not to, when the smart play would have been to treat me as enemy and move on? Why did you fight for me?" Reynolds thought about it, about all the training, the protocols, the procedures designed to keep interrogators distant and objective, about how easy it would have been to file a report, recommend further investigation, and let someone else handle it. "Because I saw you," she said simply. "Not Viktor Petrov, not a Russian operative, not a threat or a target or a case file. I saw Michael Harrison, and he deserved to be seen." He smiled, genuine, warm, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Thank you, Captain, for seeing me." 6 months later, Reynolds got a letter, handwritten, careful cursive. The handwriting of someone who'd learned to write before computers became ubiquitous. Postage from Columbus, Ohio. "Dear Captain Reynolds, I wanted to let you know I've been home for 3 months now." Real home. Not the temporary housing they set up at first. Not the VA transitional facility where they kept me for observation. Home. I bought a small house on the north side of Columbus, near where I grew up. The neighborhood has changed, some new buildings, different stores, but the bones are the same. The elementary school I attended is still there. The park where I played as a kid. The corner store where my dad used to buy newspapers on Sunday mornings. I found my parents' graves at Green Lawn Cemetery, spent an afternoon there, brought flowers, sat on the grass and talked to them, told them where I'd been, what I'd done, why I couldn't come home for their funerals, why I couldn't call, couldn't write, couldn't be their son for 35 years. I don't know if they heard me, don't know if it matters, but I needed to say it, needed to tell them I never forgot them, never stopped being Michael Harrison, even when I had to pretend I was someone else. My dad served in Korea, Bronze Star for valor. He never talked about it much, just said war was complicated, and the only people who understood were the ones who'd been there. I understand now what he meant. The things you can't explain. The experiences that sound impossible even when you live them. The gap between what happened and what people can comprehend. I'm seeing a therapist twice a week at the VA, Dr. Sarah Kim. She specializes in what they call identity trauma and prolonged isolation effects. Clinical terms for what happens when you live a lie so long you forget which version of yourself is real. She's patient, asks good questions, doesn't push, lets me work through it at my own pace. We've been working on something she calls integration. The idea that I don't have to choose between Michael Harrison and Viktor Petrov, that both are real, both are me. Michael Harrison is the kid from Ohio who loved baseball and hated math and wanted to serve his country. Viktor Petrov is the man who survived 3 decades alone in hostile territory and never broke. She says the goal isn't to erase one or the other. It's to acknowledge both, to integrate the experiences, to accept that I'm a mosaic, pieces of both identities creating something new. Some days are better than others. Some mornings I wake up and know exactly who I am, where I am, why I'm here. Other mornings I wake up speaking Russian, confused why I'm not in my Moscow apartment, why Arena isn't there. It takes a few minutes for reality to settle back in. Dr. Kim says that's normal, that decades of conditioning don't disappear overnight, that my brain is still rewiring itself, learning to live without the constant vigilance of maintaining cover. The nightmares are the hardest, not violent ones, not the kind you'd expect from someone who lived in constant danger. Mine are about being forgotten, about trying to tell people who I am and having them not believe me, about showing up at places that no longer exist, about searching for people who don't remember me, about being invisible. Dr. Kim says those aren't really about the past. They're about processing the reality of what happened, about grieving the years lost, about accepting that some things can't be recovered. But there are good days too, great days, days when I go to the cafe on North High Street and just sit. Order coffee, American coffee, not the strong Turkish kind I drank in Moscow. Read the paper, watch people, normal things, human things. Things I couldn't do for 35 years without calculating risk, without maintaining cover, without remembering to act Russian instead of American. I've started volunteering at the library downtown, helping with ESL classes, English as a second language. Ironic, right? The guy who spent decades speaking Russian is now teaching immigrants how to speak English, but it feels good, feels purposeful. These people are trying to become American, trying to integrate into a culture that's foreign to them. I understand that journey. I've lived the reverse. I can help them navigate it. Last week, one of my students, a woman from Ukraine, asked me where I learned Russian. I froze, didn't know how to answer. The truth is classified. The simple answer, I studied it, felt like another lie. I stood there silent while she waited. Finally, I said, I lived there for a long time. It's complicated. She nodded, didn't push, said, many things are complicated. Thank you for understanding. Sometimes the kindness of strangers is the thing that saves you. I've been thinking a lot about identity, about who I was, who I became, who I am. No, the truth is, I'm not entirely sure. Michael Harrison feels like a memory from someone else's life. Viktor Petrov feels like a costume I wore so long it became a second skin. Maybe I'm both. Maybe I'm neither. Maybe I'm something new. Someone who's been broken down and rebuilt so many times that all the pieces don't quite fit together anymore. Dr. Kim says that's okay. Says wholeness isn't about perfect integration. It's about accepting the fragmentation and learning to live with it. But here's what I do know. I'm learning to be okay with not knowing. Learning that healing isn't about returning to who you were before. It's about accepting who you've become and finding a way to live with it. It's about building something new from the ruins of what was. It's about choosing every day to keep existing even when existence feels impossible. I wanted to thank you again for believing me when you had no reason to, for fighting for me when it would have been easier to file a report and move on, for seeing past the performance to the person underneath. You gave me back my name, my identity, my life. That's a gift I can never repay. You asked me once what would happen to me if I would be okay. The honest answer is, I don't know. Some days I am. Some days I'm not. But I'm here. I'm alive. I'm Michael Harrison again, or some version of him. And that's more than I had 6 months ago. That's more than I thought I'd ever have. If you're ever in Columbus, there's a cafe on North High Street. Crimson Cup. Good coffee. Quiet atmosphere. Windows that look out on the street. I go there most mornings around 9, just to sit, read, watch people, normal things, human things, things that remind me I'm not invisible anymore. I'd be honored to buy you a cup of coffee. No interrogation, no rank, no protocol. Just two people who know what it means to serve, who understand that sacrifice comes in many forms, who've seen the cost of duty and chosen to honor it anyway. Take care of yourself, Captain. The work you do matters. The people you help matter. Don't forget that when the job gets hard, Don't forget that behind every file, every case number, every classified operation, there are human beings. Real people with real lives and real sacrifices. They deserve to be seen the way you saw me. With respect and gratitude, Michael Harrison, Master Sergeant, U.S. Army, retired. Reynolds read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers, new meanings. The careful way Harrison wrote about both identities, the measured acknowledgement that healing wasn't linear, the gratitude that felt earned rather than obligatory. She carefully folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, not filed away, not archived, just kept. A reminder that sometimes the most important part of the job wasn't extracting information or following protocol or building cases. Sometimes it was just seeing another human being and choosing to believe them, choosing to fight for them, choosing to witness their story even when doing so was difficult, uncomfortable, challenging to institutional norms. She thought about Harrison in that cafe, sitting by the window, reading the paper, watching people, the simple act of existing without performance, without fear, without the constant calculation of maintaining cover. She hoped he found peace there, hoped the nightmares faded, hoped that someday the integration Dr. Kim talked about would feel less like managing trauma and more like simply living. The official investigation into Project Nightingale took 8 months. The findings were classified, naturally, involved multiple agencies, required testimony from retired officers who'd been part of the chain of command, demanded accountability from institutions yet preferred to avoid acknowledging mistakes. But certain policy changes were implemented. Better oversight of deep cover operations, mandatory status reviews every 5 years, psychological evaluation protocols for long-term assets, enhanced verification systems with multiple redundancies, funding guarantees that couldn't be unilaterally terminated without extraction plan in place, protections for assets who'd been left in place, legal guarantees that they wouldn't be prosecuted if they found ways to come home on their own. The changes were documented in classified memoranda, distributed to intelligence leadership across all branches, taught in updated training protocols at intelligence schools. Project Nightingale became a case study. Not the triumphant kind, the cautionary kind. The kind that taught future intelligence officers what institutional failure looked like. What happened when bureaucratic convenience became more important than human cost. None of it could give Harrison back the 35 years he'd lost. Couldn't restore the life he might have lived. Couldn't give him back his parents' final years, couldn't undo the isolation, couldn't erase the trauma of being forgotten by the country he'd never stopped serving. But maybe it would prevent the next Michael Harrison from being abandoned. Maybe the next deep cover operative wouldn't have to wait 3 decades to come home. Maybe institutional memory would be stronger, more resilient, more human. Reynolds was promoted to major 2 years after the interrogation. The promotion board cited her investigative work, her persistence, her refusal to accept easy answers when difficult questions demanded attention. She continued working in military intelligence, continued conducting interviews, continued looking for truth in the spaces between words, continued developing the instinct that had led her to see Michael Harrison when everyone else saw Viktor Petrov. But she never forgot Harrison, never forgot what it looked like when someone had been carrying a burden so heavy for so long that they'd almost forgotten what it felt like to set it down. She thought about him often, wondered how he was doing, whether the therapy was helping, whether the nightmares had faded, whether he'd found some version of peace in that cafe on North High Street. She kept his letter in her desk drawer, not as a trophy, not as evidence, as a reminder, a touchstone. On difficult days, when interrogations went poorly, when cases went cold, when institutional bureaucracy felt overwhelming, she'd take it out, read it again, remind herself why the work mattered, Remind herself that behind every file, every case number, every classified operation, there were human beings, real people with real lives and real sacrifices, and they deserved to be seen. The intelligence community was built on secrets, on compartmentalization, on need-to-know protocols that kept information siloed, on systems designed to protect missions even at the cost of protecting people. Reynolds understood that, accepted it as necessary. But she also understood, in a way she hadn't before Harrison, that systems could fail, that protocols could become prisons, that the very structures designed to keep assets safe could become the mechanisms that abandoned them. She made it her mission to remember that, to look past the files, to see the people, to ask the questions that protocols didn't address. Who is this person? What have they sacrificed? What do they need? How can I help them come home? It made her work harder, slower, more emotionally taxing, but it also made it more meaningful, more human, more aligned with the values that had brought her into service in the first place. The belief that duty wasn't just about following orders or completing missions. It was about honoring the people who served, about ensuring that sacrifice was recognized, that service was valued, that no one was forgotten. 3 years after Harrison came home, Reynolds received an invitation, handwritten, formal cardstock, an invitation to a small gathering in Columbus, Ohio, a celebration of veterans who'd served in intelligence operations. Harrison was one of the organizers. The letter with the invitation was brief. Captain Reynolds would be honored if you could attend. Small group. Others who served in shadows. Others who understand. Others who know what it means to come home. M.H. She went, flew to Columbus on a Friday afternoon, found the venue, a VFW hall on the east side. Nothing fancy. Just a room with folding tables and American flags and photographs of veterans on the walls. Harrison was there, 3 years older, still carrying the weight of his past, but different somehow, lighter, more present. He introduced her to others, men and women who'd served in intelligence, some for short assignments, some for careers spanning decades, some who'd been recognized, some who never would be. All of them understanding the unique burden of service that couldn't be acknowledged, of sacrifices that had to remain secret, of coming home from wars that officially never happened. They traded stories, careful ones, mindful of security, but honest ones, about the cost of secrets, about the weight of lies, about the challenge of rebuilding identity after years of performance, about the unexpected difficulty of normal life when normal life had been impossible for so long. Harrison pulled Reynolds aside at one point, led her to a quiet corner. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, "for everything, for seeing me, for fighting for me, for not giving up when it would have been easier." "You already thanked me," Reynolds said, "in your letter." "I know, but I wanted to say it in person. Wanted you to see that I'm okay. Not perfect, not undamaged, but okay. Healing, living, and that's because of you." Reynolds felt emotion pressing behind her eyes, professional boundaries blurring in the face of genuine human connection. "You did the hard part," she said. "You survived. You came home. You're building a life, that's all you." "Maybe," Harrison said, "but you gave me the chance. You believed me when I needed someone to believe. That matters. It will always matter." They stood together, two people connected by a moment in an interrogation room, by a choice to see truth instead of just following protocol, by a recognition that sometimes the most important thing wasn't the information extracted or the case closed. Sometimes It was just witnessing another person's story, honoring their sacrifice, acknowledging their service. "How are you really?" Reynolds asked. Harrison considered. Honest assessment. "Some days good, some days hard. But I'm here. I exist. I have a name. I have a life. That's more than I thought I'd have. That's enough." It was enough. It had to be enough. Because some wounds didn't heal. Some losses couldn't be recovered. Some sacrifices were permanent. The only thing left was to honor them, to remember them, to ensure they weren't forgotten. And Michael Harrison would never be forgotten again. What would you do if you discovered someone had been serving their country in complete anonymity for decades? Would you fight for them? Let me know in the comments. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to Military and Veterans Archives. We share true military stories every single day. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and the untold experiences of those who serve. Thanks for listening. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the heroes among us.